So we know that residential schools took kids off the land and away from the culture, right? And had an impact that way. So, so it really changed the landscape, and realizing that Indigenous well-being is really embedded and connected to the land. And how do we then reconcile the changes to the land that are occurring now and map what the relationship to the land. So I'm working with the east side, and there's many developments occurring. One is a proposed road that goes up to 3 communities around God's Lake, God's River, and Bunny, and also to the Island Lake communities. And the impetus of that very well might have been a mine, and that's what community members say, is this road is being built to access precious minerals that are owned by Yamada. So I'll just jump ahead one to say that this is the context that WNO has been developed in. Now, it's a very different planning process than what's occurring in Ontario around the far north, where in the far north, they have stopped development until each community develops their community plan, and they decide whether this is a no-go for mining, for other developments, and what kind of development they want. So there are the possibilities of traditional territories having no-go zones or being completely no-go zones, including mining. And in Manitoba, it's been a very different process where it's been development as usual. Mining has occurred, mining exploration has occurred while this planning process has been going on. So it hasn't halted development, and in fact, in some ways it's seen as fostering it by making room for road and making room for development. So there was a BIT funding which ran out from 2007 to 2012. There was 2.5 million throughout those 5 years, so 0.5 million per year to do land use planning, but that was split among many, many communities. And that's compared to the UNESCO World Heritage Sites, which are not so mineral rich, right? So they have a different kind of resources in those areas. They're not seen as having big mining gold potential. And they had $10 million to develop their UNESCO World Heritage bid, which include beautiful traditional land use mapping. Now we're here in 2017, and we're in a situation where there's very little funding for communities that weren't part of the UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Some money has been available through Manitoba Treasury Board, but it's sporadic. Years go without funding. So it's hard to maintain any continuity. I started after the funding stopped, of course, timing-wise. And I started with a traditional land use capacity building exercise with Terry Tobias coming, and 8 communities participated. So the Island Lake communities, the 4 Island Lake communities, the 3 up near God's Lake and Barons River participated. And we had 35 people there, so very involved, 60 hours, and people developed their own protocol for mapping and agreed to it. And their rationale was that this has to be the highest quality that will stand up in court. And the reason why that it has to stand up in court is because of things where we're recognizing there's a lot of alienation from the land. We know hydro impacts the land. We know forestry impacts the land, and government restrictions, as well as mining. So this is a look at a draft map of a compilation of activities, and you can see all the activities that were mapped. So overnight sites, whether they had a log cabin, plywood cabin, tent stove, fishing activities for sustenance, bird hunting activities for sustenance, and there was always, this was a 60-page questionnaire that community members delivered, and it always went, after each statement was, for your family, hunt and killed for your family, for sustenance. So trapping, animals, and cultural sites as well. And considering that some areas were alienation zones where people couldn't go any longer, and it wasn't their fault, they were evicted from these areas. So in Red Sucker Lake, which is an island lake, they tried to give an eviction notice to the mine, and instead were given a court injunction so they couldn't go in that area anymore. And so that becomes an alienation, but we've got historical alienations which are much greater, right? If some areas developed already, which happens around Hollow Water First Nation, Winnebago and Black River, then they're alienated from that land. They're not able to hunt and fish and trap there. So the process was, looking at the maps, determining what areas, doing a map biography with many, many people. I think about 100 altogether we did surveys for, but I wish that was 100 in any one community. That's the gold standard that is tried for. And we had to give those maps back and say, did we get it right? Did we miss anything? And we'd like to know your transportation around this now that you see your activities, and what you'd like to see out on the land. So this intervention of mapping hopefully has a capacity building aspect as well as a reconciliation aspect. And for that, since my voice is kind of froggy today, I'm hoping that my videos play. If they don't play in here, I'll just go off. Oh, they do. So.
Along the north shore of Iron Lake. Iron Lake is a flying community. No roads, nothing, only accessible by lake roads, like these southern lakes, which I hear are contaminated.
My land is so peaceful. I go snowshoeing, I go rabbit snaring. This is like.
If you look at the land and how beautiful it is, one of the images on the table here was used in an online article with National Geographic, and I made sure always make sure I put Garden Hill, because I'm part of the community and I want to make sure that people know about Garden Hill.
But we know from our ancestors, from our parents, our grandfathers, we know that we've been using this land. And they tell us that it's ours, it was lent to us by the Creator to use, to feed our children and just to live off the land. This is important. And the governments don't recognize oral teachings, like saying things, doing things orally. This is how we do it. This is why it's important now that we have to have something documented on a map. Like areas where we hunt, where we fish, where we collect our medicines, where we do our ceremonies, where we know our burials. So there's burials everywhere. A long time ago, when they traveled, they did a lot of traveling. They only come together only in the summer times, which is at the old post. And in the fall, they all disappeared to the forest. While we traveled The stories I hear is they lose their loved ones. They just to the funeral right there where they are. So all these travel routes, we know some areas where our people are buried. We only know a few, but I believe there's more than what we know what's out there. So we would like to keep those areas the way they are, intact, not disturbed or no construction, especially the river systems, hydro. That's why we really want to protect the Island Lake River. That's why we said we don't want the east side road crossing Island Lake River.
That's I'm trying to save our land. Like we use it for lots of purposes, like hunting, trapping, fishing, and collecting berries and collecting medicine, Indian medicine. It's really important to us, and I would like to see that with our people to continue using our ways of life.
When I was a child, I used to go with my parents, and maybe my teen years, I would go out our trampling areas towards the northwest. This whole post down to the island. We lived in the city for a few years, and when we moved back, we had and there's this huge power line with these high tension power lines with the towers, and it basically felt like it cut right across our land, you know. And I thought, wow, you know, my kids and grandkids are going to see that, but they're not going to know what it was like to not have that there.
What I want to see is our people to have control over the land. They know not to destroy it. We are supposed to be the caretakers of the land. And what we are given there is everything, but we can't touch it because of the governments. That's why we are so poor in housing. We can't even get to the trees. We have a lot of medicines everywhere. Those two, we don't have access, telling us not to touch anything. There's a fish, we gotta have access to fish. We gotta get our economic development up and running, which is supposed to be a big part of our livelihood up there. Sustainable development is what we're after.
I like looking after these chickens, something I've never done. Can't get too close to them though. Emotionally attached. They're cute. I don't know anything about farming or planting stuff. When's the best time to plant, how to plant it, and when it's watered. So I learned all of that.
So when you think about certain, I guess, what they would call progress, you know, you start to worry about what is it going to do to the land. And you hear horror stories from other First Nations communities or regions.
My husband, years ago, worked. They came up here, the crushing rock company. He went to work with them for a few weeks. Says, oh, those men are very racist, you know. But only his boss was really nice to him. When I heard about this mining that came to us, it broke my heart because I was thinking about my grandparents traveling, and I was thinking, what if they lose it?
Sustainable development is what we're after. This is what we're after, sustainable development. So the most important thing is we have to get our people to start eating off the land, not from store foods.
So that's one story of development, and it's evolving. So that's not the final version of this one. We're getting feedback. It's called participatory video. And this is another one. So this is a community on the same lake, And you're going to see it has a kind of a different story, and very interesting story that includes children on the land.
Being a First Nation, it is a very strong, I think, connection that we have with the land, because we do rely on it for our sustenance, and our livelihood is dependent on what the land provides for us. So from there, we've as you've probably heard today at the Elders Gathering, there's been a lot of talk about the teachings that the land provides, the animals, their lives, and some of the things that we can learn from even the animals themselves. And that sort of gives us those teachings, and we were able to pass them on to our young ones, and instill some strong family values.
To find out the areas or the territory that our grandfathers and our fathers that have passed on, the requirements they needed to survive. I think that should be noted, and the mapping is important. A lot of elders have come forward that they want to be part of that process. So the young people will know the areas they travel to help get supplies for the summer. Then in the fall, they use those roads to go trapping there. And that's where they stay for the year. And they the only time they spend in the community is in the summertime.
I've always been the others say, we're still surviving today despite that conversation.
When I was young, we traveled a lot by boat, looking like my parents. That's the only way people could get food. They just traveling around all over the place. And my parents' track line is in Ontario, so it took us a while to get over there and back. Especially sometimes we'd get stuck there or break up.
A lot better when I see it, but there was something when I reached them, especially when we're doing land-based activities, to see them smile and enjoy what they're doing.
Went to our family services, took some people out, youth out to. They took them out in the lands and they learned from there. They sent their youth, didn't want to come home. They liked it out there so much and they fished everything.
From a small, isolated community, and there's strong outside influences coming in now with technology, and we were constantly fighting those to try and retain our language, our identity. So it's getting harder and harder to maintain your own identity, even Shiv, and we've been working in partnership with the University of Manitoba to develop a traditional land use plan. Industries are looking in to see what resources can be harvested from our area, and those intrusions, I'll call them, are impacting our traditional way of life. It's impacting our culture, and how do we deal with those and try and manage them so that at least we can maximize the benefit and return to the community if industry is coming in.
So you can see the perspective of First Nations, where they see mining as a tool, and hope is, instead of creating development, that it's industrial development, it's community development. So they're looking at, for example, getting out on the land more And they're using their trap lines in really, really interesting ways with very little funding or no funding to do that. Is using their trap lines, using the land to heal, and sending people with addictions out with their whole family for a minimum of 3 weeks. And they say that has an incredible effect. And we put in proposals around shelters for women using the trap lines, because as you know, the housing crisis in First Nations communities is very severe, and there are 23 people living in one house that's moldy. So using trap lines as women's shelters and also as emergency housing for CFS. So through Status of Women, who knows if we'll get it. I don't even know if Status of Women exists anymore. They never respond. But this whole idea that this land, this is where they see the healing taking place, where they feel they have control over their lives. And that might be a path to reconciliation, is finding those ways that allow people to get back on the land and use the land. So it asked the question, will province and federal government respect the community development and land use plans for First Nations traditional territory, and realize that the people who have been there since immemorial will be there in the future, and you know, should have access to those resources. So in Island Lake and God's Lake, these are communities where nobody else is. This is not a, you know, no communities exist. So it doesn't seem like a difficult question to ask, but it's worth asking. Thank you.